My husband hated me for a lifetime because I couldn't save Ava Moore, the woman on the operating table. He forced me to terminate my pregnancy. His eyes filled with rage. You did it on purpose, didn't you? Because she was my first love. You let her die. But later, when a patient's enraged family came to attack me, he shielded me from the fatal blow. I tried everything to save him, but he gave up his will to live. I can finally see Ava again. At the morgue, my father-in-law blocked me from entering. You cursed us. One wasn't enough. You had to take my son too. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice thick with grief and fury. No one stood up for me. To everyone. It seemed like I was the source of all their misfortune. When I woke up in the past, I understood immediately what had been given to me. Not a gift, more like a second indictment. A chance to stand in the same courtroom and hear the same verdict delivered again. Unless I was brave enough to rewrite the terms of my own story. I was 31 again. My body was lighter. My joints didn't ache. The grief that had calcified around my heart over decades of a loveless marriage hadn't happened yet. Ava Moore's surgery was in 4 hours. In my previous life, I had operated on Ava with every skill I possessed. I had done everything right. And still, something went wrong. A complication so rare it appeared in medical literature only a handful of times. And Ava Moore died on my table. And Mason never forgave me for it. He never said it outright. Mason was too controlled for that, too practiced in the architecture of silence. But I felt it in the way he looked at me across the dinner table, in the way he flinched when I reached for his hand, in the way he stood 6 inches further from me than necessary in every room we shared for the rest of our marriage. When I told him I was pregnant, he had looked at me with those cold, beautiful eyes and said we weren't ready. And I, exhausted and desperate to reach him, had agreed to something I would spend the rest of my life mourning. He didn't leave me. That was the cruelest part. He stayed and grew to resent me so thoroughly that by the time a grieving family member drove a knife toward my back in a hospital corridor, Mason stepped in front of it not out of love, but out of the muscle memory of a man who had once believed in protecting what was his. He died 3 days later. I can finally see Ava again, he whispered, and those were the last words he ever spoke to me. I had stood at his grave in the rain and felt nothing but a vast, echoless emptiness, the kind that comes not from losing someone but from realizing you had lost them, so gradually there was nothing left to grieve but the idea of what might have been. And then I woke up here. Young, unbroken. 4 hours before everything started. I stood up, splashed cold water on my face, and studied my reflection with the dispassionate eye of a diagnostician. My hands were steady. My mind was sharp with a clarity that felt almost violent, the way the world looks immediately after a storm. I knew what I had to do. The solution had assembled itself in those first stunned minutes after waking, built from journal articles, conference presentations, a symposium in Zurich 7 years from now where a Swiss surgeon would present astonishing outcomes with a third-generation artificial heart the medical community was still treating with cautious skepticism. I knew what that device could do. I had read the follow-up studies that wouldn't be published for years yet. And I knew, with the certainty of someone who had already lived through the alternative, that an artificial heart inside my chest was a better outcome than the broken life stretching out ahead of me. Head nurse Patricia Chen was at the surgery prep station when I found her. One of those women who had been in operating rooms so long she had absorbed their rhythms entirely, her face capable of expressing approximately 4 emotions, all professionally appropriate. I told her what I intended to do. The silence that followed was the loudest I had ever heard in that unit. Her expression cycled through disbelief, outrage, and careful blankness before she spoke. Are you out of your mind? If you give her your heart, what happens to you? Ava will receive my heart, I said calmly. And I'll take the artificial one. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Artificial hearts are still experimental. The outcomes data is limited. You're a healthy 31-year-old woman. The risks. I know the risks. I don't agree with this, she said finally after a long silence. You don't have to, I said. I'll make the arrangements, she said, and picked up her clipboard. The surgery took 9 hours. When I came back to consciousness, I came back slowly, the way you surface from very deep water, the wide, oceanic pain of a body that had been opened and rearranged, and the steady, unfamiliar rhythm of the device in my chest, mechanical and precise. It felt strange. Not wrong, just strange. Like hearing a familiar song played on an instrument you'd never encountered before. Through the narrow window of the recovery bay, I watched the operating room doors open, 2 stretchers wheeled out, and Mason crossing the corridor in long, urgent strides. He went to Ava first. Of course he did. I watched him take her hand, heard the broken edge in his voice. "Ava, please, don't leave me," and felt the old familiar ache move through me like weather. Not jealousy. Exactly. The grief of a woman who had spent a lifetime loving a man whose heart had always had another address. Patricia intercepted him, and I watched the moment he finally turned and registered that I was there. Pale, barely breathing, occupying a stretcher of my own. He came to my bedside and looked down at me with those dark eyes that had looked at me across so many years of silence, and said quietly, "Rachel, thank you for saving Ava." I reached for him, my arm heavy. "Mason," I said, my voice worn thin by anesthesia. "Promise me something. No matter what happens, don't take this baby away from me." The words landed between us like stones dropped into still water. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Ava and I, it's not what you think. I'm not going to leave you for her. I won't make you terminate the pregnancy. Stop overthinking things." I didn't respond. I knew better than to trust the words. Not because he was lying in that moment, but because intentions and outcomes are different countries, and Mason had never been good at the journey between them. From the bed beside mine came a small sound, a twitch of fingers. Ava was waking up. Mason straightened immediately, his whole body reorienting the way a compass needle swings to find north, helpless and absolute. He was at her bedside before I could draw another breath. I watched his retreating back with the exhausted calm of a woman who has already grieved this loss and come out the other side. No matter how many times I was reborn, Ava would always be the one who mattered most to him. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me back down. The days that followed were quiet in the way that recovery is quiet. Mason visited, not often, occupied as he was with Ava, but he came and talked to me in the careful, measured way of a man trying to be decent and finding it harder than expected. On the 3rd day, he said the surgical team was calling me remarkable, that they'd never seen a physician volunteer for an experimental procedure to save a patient. "They don't know you did it specifically for Ava," he said. "No," I agreed. "Why didn't you want them to know?" I looked at him in the afternoon light, seeing him differently now, stripped of the illusions I had spent a lifetime building around him. "Because it wasn't about Ava," I said. "Then what was it about?" It had been about the only thing I'd had left to give at the beginning of my second chance. A clean break from the story I already knew. The surgeon who failed to save Mason's first love. The wife who was blamed. The woman who shrank and accommodated and waited for love that never arrived in the form she needed. Sometimes the only way to become someone different is to do something so irrevocable the old version of yourself cannot follow you through it. It was about me, I said. I needed to make a decision that was entirely mine, that no one could take from me or use against me. He was quiet for a long moment. "Rachel, what's happening with us?" "I'm not sure yet, but I need time to figure that out, on my own." Something shifted in his expression, rawer and less composed than the practiced confidence he usually wore. "I can give you that," he said finally. Ava was discharged 2 weeks before I was. I watched her leave from my window, Mason at her side, her hand in his elbow, and felt none of the bitterness I had expected. No jealousy, no resentment. What I felt instead was something cleaner. Closer to completion. I had saved her freely, with full knowledge of the cost, and the choice had been mine alone. No one could claim it or take it from me. Patricia came to see me that evening with terrible cafeteria coffee and the look of a woman who has been waiting to have a conversation for 2 weeks. "What are you going to do?" she asked. It was a large question dressed in simple clothes. What to do with my marriage, my pregnancy, my life reconstructed around a mechanical heart, and the memory of a future I had refused to live. "I'm going to raise this child," I said. "On my own terms. With or without Mason, depending on whether he figures out what he actually wants before I run out of patience." I pressed my hand to my sternum. "And I'm going to take care of this heart of mine. Both of them. Patricia looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. A real one, wide and unguarded. The smile of a woman who has been waiting to see someone finally choose themselves. Good, she said simply. The morning I was discharged, Mason was waiting in the lobby. Alone. No flowers. His hands were in his pockets and he looked like a man who had rehearsed something and was no longer confident in the script. I know what you did, he said. Patricia told me. You gave her your actual heart and took an experimental device. Why? So I wouldn't have a reason to hate you? No, I said. So I wouldn't have a reason to hate myself. I'm a surgeon. When I lose a patient, I carry it. I made a decision I could live with. That's all. You could have died. I'm aware. He stepped closer, and I could see in his eyes the complicated architecture of a man being asked to dismantle something he had built over many years. The certainty that I was the variable that had disrupted his life's intended shape, that his unhappiness had a clear and simple cause. I haven't been fair to you, he said. For a long time. No, I agreed, you haven't. He flinched at the directness. I had rarely been direct with Mason in my previous life. I had been gentle and accommodating and endlessly patient, and all that patience had taught him I would absorb whatever he gave me without complaint. I did not intend to teach him that lesson again. I want to try to be different, he said quietly. Can I be there for the pregnancy for you? I looked at him for a long moment. The mechanical heart in my chest beat its steady, indifferent rhythm. I had chosen it knowing it would remind me every day of the life I had refused to live again. In some ways it was the most honest thing inside me. A heart that worked without pretending, that beat without delusion, that simply did what it was built to do. You can try, I said. But I am not the same person I was. I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm not going to make myself smaller so you have more room. If you want to be in my life, you need to actually be in it, present, honest, all of it. Something settled in his expression. Not resolution exactly, but the beginning of it. Okay, he said. And Mason. I picked up my bag. Ava Moore keeps the heart. That was never in question. Something flickered across his face. Small, uncertain, more real than anything I'd seen from him in years. I know, he said. I walked past him toward the exit. The morning air hit me as the doors slid open. Cool and sharp and full of the quiet, extraordinary promise of an ordinary day. Behind me I heard him fall into step. The mechanical heart beat on, carrying me forward into the life I had chosen to live.